All right, what's up, everybody? How you doing? Welcome to another edition of SPOLITICS Live. and I knew I was going to do a live this week, but I had no idea. I had some idea about what it would be about. Did not know that I would be sort of revisiting my former employer once again, which is kind of a catch-22 whenever I talk about ESPN or things that went down at ESPN or things that happened at ESPN. It's always a catch-22, I think, for me, because so much of my life I have moved on from that place. And I always give ESPN the credit of being the best place I've ever worked, the longest place I've ever worked. And so despite how awkwardly things ended between me and ESPN, I have very sentimental feelings about that place. I'm also enough of it from a distance to be able to properly put it into context. And so people, whenever I discuss ESPN, they accuse me of not letting go. Or they say, like, oh, all you can do is talk about ESPN. That is not true at all. And I promise you that this place is not really a part of my thought process with anything. I don't spend time or spend reflective time thinking about ESPN. I take it for what it was, no more or no less. And as I said, I'm very grateful and happy for the role that it played in my career. It was a job I never imagined having, but it was also not my dream job in the sense, like, I wasn't dreaming from the time that I became a professional journalist that I wanted to be at ESPN. So all that being said, when I do discuss ESPN, I try to be transparent, honest, and aware that there will always be perceptions that I'm bitter because I'm talking about ESPN. Well, in this case, usually when I do address ESPN or something that happened there or something, or people that still work there or people who used to work there. So usually when I address my colleagues, both, from there, it's like I've been, I sort of have to address what happened. So I just want people to understand that, like, I don't enjoy talking about ESPN or people who work at ESPN, especially not when it comes to something that is dramatic. So all that being said, clearly a lot of people saw when my dear friend Cari Champion, and you guys know how close I am to Cari. She's one of my best friends. She was a bridesmaid in my wedding. We're still very close to this day. We still hang out, all of those things. And matter of fact, I just got off the phone with her not too long ago. And so people know that Cari and I have a very tight relationship. Recently, Cari addressed something about Stephen A. Smith based off, she is not the first person to observe this. She's not the only person in the circle of people that we know to address this. It's just a lot of times we have done it sort of privately in noticing certain things when it comes to Stephen A. Smith, and not to suggest that he is often the topic of conversation, but just when something blows up, it suddenly makes the rounds. And Cari, like I did, like many other people did, saw what Michelle Beadle, another one of our former colleagues, had to say about Stephen A. Smith recently, where she jumped off the top rope on Stephen A. Smith. And this is not the first time. She has come at Stephen A. Smith many, many times, including when she was at ESPN, Stephen A. was at ESPN, I was there, and Cari was there. And she felt a way about some very, I want to say, regrettable comments that Stephen A. Smith made when it came to domestic violence as it related to the Ray Rice situation. And that wasn't the only time that he did it. He also had some, what I felt like were tone deaf comments when there was the domestic violence situation between Chad Ochocinco and his former wife. I believe they got married, Evelyn Lozada. And so these were comments that he made on First Take that Cari first signaled during their actual discussion of it on the show. And I remember when it happened, I was watching the show and I was cringing because of some of the things that Stephen A. Smith said. And Cari was doing her best to moderate. And I felt like she was unfortunately silenced in that conversation. And because she was silenced in that conversation, I think it was a bad look for the show. Had they just let her, I think had they involved her more in the discussion, I think that discussion would have gone differently and would not have come off the way that it came off. So all that being said, that's a little backstory. And I'm going to put a pin in that because there's a reason I'm going to come back to that. So nevertheless, Michelle Beadle has consistently for years talked about her dislike of Stephen A. Smith. Recently, Stephen A. was promoting a solitaire game app, and this presented itself as another opportunity for Michelle Beadle to go in on Stephen A. Smith. Here is what she said.
Literally the morning of my last day on Get Up, as Greenie was giving me a heartfelt goodbye, and I awkwardly sat there. As I was leaving the set, they started a promo that Stephen A. Smith will be on the show tomorrow. Like, it is him. So let's stop acting like the guy gets worked to death. It's him.
Yeah.
So that being said, I'm like, he made you look like fools for handing him a blank check in the first place because he doesn't even give a shit about the stuff that he's paid $1 gazillion to talk about. And now he's turning around and turning that into a money-making opportunity. Yeah. And then the money-making opportunity, turns out it looks like it's a fraudulent crap business to begin with. Honestly, I'm not a religious person, but I pray for the downfall. I really do.
It's going to be amazing. It's going to be amazing.
It's gross, man. You got to have principles in this.
All right, I'm going to just stop it right there. Michelle Beadle, again, used to be at ESPN. She hosted Sports Nation and, was very beloved at the network and has since moved on. She went to NBC, has been in some other places. Independently of how Michelle Beadle may feel about Stephen A. Smith, I think praying for somebody's downfall is I think it's classless. It is classless to pray for somebody's downfall, to publicly admit that you are praying for someone to fall on their face is, I think, beneath you. And listen, I've known Beadle. I like Beadle, but I think that's beneath her to do. And she also questions Stephen A. Smith's work ethic. And regardless of how you may feel about Stephen A. Smith as a personality, the one thing you can never question about him is his work ethic, is that it is literally a gold standard in our business. And so while I understand her criticisms of him and this app, and it did turn out that solitaire app, based off the reporting that has been done, that the solitaire app, the company that produces that app, is being sued and there's some shady business going on. In fact, another ESPN personality, Mina Kimes, who also was endorsing the app, she has since apologized and said, hey, I messed up because I didn't look into this app or who was developing it. And it turns out they are doing some shady business. So if you want to criticize Stephen A. for being involved with a company that is being sued for fraud, have at it. But when you start praying for people's downfall, then it's like, what are we doing? And listen, I will say this, it is completely on brand and on track with everything that that Michelle Beadle has said about Stephen A. Smith over the years. Consistently has said how much she does not like this man. And Stephen A. has never responded, which is something that was very noticeable in light of who he does tend to respond to, whether asked to or not. And this is something that, after Michelle Beadle's comments, that Cari Champion, my friend, make note of.
Stephen A. I played that Michelle Beadle clip for one reason and one reason only. I'm old enough to remember being on that show and getting in trouble based on some comments you said about women and whether or not they should know their place when it comes to abuse or non-abuse. Ray Rice comes to mind. Not going to get into the details of all of that. But Beadle just came for you yet again, like she did when I worked at ESPN. I wonder, do you have that same smoke for her that you have for Jasmine Crockett, that you have for Michelle Obama, that you sometimes display for me and Jemele Hill? Do you have that same smoke? I'm sick of it. Keep the same energy. And I call you and I root for you and I say, hey, I got your back. I'm happy for you. But you keep that same energy, sir, for everybody.
All right. So what Cari is talking about, and for those who are wondering, now, why are you commenting? I'm commenting because clearly my name was a part of this. And so I thought it was important for me to address all of this. This is what I want you all to understand. Number one, I'm not Cari Champion's spokesperson. Whatever Cari chooses to share about her experiences at ESPN, that's her story to tell. Whatever she chooses to share about her relationship with Stephen A. Smith, that is hers to share, and that is his to share as well. And he also had a response that I'm going to get to in a moment. And the reason, what Cari was pointing out was hypocrisy. The hypocrisy of, or at least maybe hypocrisy isn't the right word, or maybe it is. I don't know. Depends on how you want to define it. But Cari was pointing out was something that has been somewhat noticeable, is that Stephen A., in some very public comments about Jasmine Crockett, he had a lot to say about the Congresswoman. And listen, she's an elected official. She is fair game. She is not above criticism because she's Black, because she's a woman, or because she's a politician. She is not above it. And so he came for Jasmine Crockett in a way that I felt uncomfortable watching, that I felt was unfair, because while some of it was about her job performance and her inability to work with Donald Trump, he also, to me, was playing up to lazy tropes about Black women in his criticism of her. And that was the part that I think we all responded to, whether it be publicly or just privately talking among each other, is when you start saying terms like ghetto verbiage in referring to a Congresswoman who is Black, where the right often likes to come for the way that Jasmine Crockett carries herself, the way that she speaks, and they know what they're doing when they do that. They're playing on tropes that they know will stick in people's mind because they're playing on stereotypes and things that have been said about Black women for years. And to see you with your platform play into those same stereotypical comments was disappointing. Period, point blank. You apologize for it. I got it. Hope this is a teachable moment for you. And so when Beadle came forward with her criticism of you, considering the way you criticized Serena Williams, considering what you said about Michelle Obama, there's like a long kind of line and list there. And while women have certainly been subjected to that, so have other Black people. When you were on the pivot, and I may pull this video at some point, you discussed how the way that LeBron has disrespected you, you felt like part of that, he felt comfortable enough to do that because you were Black. And you called him out and said, I don't see you going at white reporters like that. You were very clear in your criticism of LeBron. This is the same criticism being aimed at you because there is a track record there that people see you. And I know you've since apologized to Kyrie Irving. It's a bit of a strange apology, but nevertheless, Kyrie, LeBron, Kevin Durant. And listen, I understand as somebody who's in that seat in terms of the position of criticism, because you're talking about sports, especially if you're talking about the NBA and the NFL, the majority of athletes that you do talk about are going to be Black. And so sometimes I do think that Black journalists who have platforms are unnecessarily held to a different standard when it comes to discussion of Black athletes and Black people, where some people have this completely unrealistic expectation that we have to stay positive about a Black athlete no matter what, or other Black people, because we're in this position. And oh my God, if the white people see the Black person criticizing the Black person, that's just going to give them more license to criticize Black people, as if they needed Black people to justify them criticizing us to begin with. If we didn't have the platforms we platform, white people would find a way to criticize Black athletes and Black people if they wanted to. They don't need us to do it. So this idea that we somehow give them permission to do it, I've always believed is a lie. If they want to take it, if they want to do it, they'll do it. It doesn't matter. So that is what Cari was talking about. Now, here was your response, where I will get to some specific things that you said about how you felt about her criticizing you.
You just said, Cari, you called me, you root for me. Why would you root for somebody that called you out in Jemele Hill, who's your good friend? Because it's never happened. Never. I've shown you nothing but love. What are you talking about? You were hired at First Take in large part because of me. You stayed as long as you stayed and had the support of the people that supported you because of.
I got to stop it right there. See, one thing I don't like about these conversations, and particularly when I've seen Stephen A. have these conversations, is when you bring in what you did for somebody to say, oh, if it wasn't for me, then you wouldn't be, because I've heard you say something similar about me. And I have always credited Stephen A. Smith with the fact that when I was a columnist in Orlando and Stephen A. had a show called Quite Frankly on ESPN, he had a segment on the show called The Back Page, which he purposely and intentionally made as a space for Black columnists. So I was on it, Rob Parker was on it, a lot of people were on it who were Black opinion makers, opinionists during that time. And it is very true that being able to be on Quite Frankly and to be, sort of seen nationally was definitely something that helped me in my career. Make no mistake about it. And I'm not trying to discredit anything that you have done for me. But you saying that you helped Cari get to First Take, I know that unequivocally not to be true. And I'm going to just say it what it is. Do I think that you put in a good word here and there for Cari? I'm not saying that you didn't. But you made it seem like you scouted her at the Tennis Channel. You brought her over to ESPN, and that's how she got First Take. And I can tell you 1,000%, the man that did that, his name is Jerry Madeline. You and I both know him. Jerry Madeline was somebody whose job at ESPN was to scout talent. He was the one who scouted Cari from the Tennis Channel, if I'm not mistaken. I was there because I was one of the people who tried out for First Take. I was already an employee of ESPN. It was me, Cindy Brunson. They gave us like 2-week trials to host First Take. And I knew that I really didn't have a chance to get the job. I had been on the other side of the desk as somebody who was there as, a panelist. That's what I did. And so people were used to seeing me debate, not necessarily host. And so I knew that it was going to be something that I probably wouldn't be their first or second or third choice to do that, because I think they saw me as more of a debater as opposed to a host. No problem. But happy that they still gave me the opportunity anyway. It was a chance for me to sort of wet my beak when it came to hosting, which is something at that point I hadn't done a whole lot of, but was obviously eyeing that as something that maybe would be the next step in my career. So while I was trying out for First Take, they brought in other candidates to try out for First Take. Cari was one. I was on campus when she tried out. I never met her. I didn't see her, but I knew when she interviewed, because another one of my good friends also interviewed for the First Take position. Cari and I didn't know each other at that time. So I just want to make that clear. And so, yeah, for Cari to get that job was miraculous in a lot of ways. It spoke to how well her audition went. I knew based off my own conversations with Skip that Cari wasn't his first choice. So you were completely telling the truth about that. But you didn't know Cari from a can of paint. So to then suddenly reframe this story like you're the reason that Cari Champion wound up on First Take, bro, I got nothing against you, but I'm just calling bullshit on that. I'm gonna just say it what it is. All right. But let's fast forward to when Cari and I became really good friends. And Cari, I reached out to Cari once she got the job because I was very happy that Cari, a Black woman, was able to hold that seat on a high-profile show on ESPN's one of their most, high-profile, well-positioned shows at the network. To me, that was a win for everybody to see a Black woman in that position. And so I was happy. So I reached out to her, and I knew there was this narrative that tried to pit me and Cari against each other. Like I would be unhappy that Cari would be on First Take as another Black woman on the show. And no, I wasn't going to be unhappy with that at all. I was excited. And I wanted to make sure that she didn't buy into those narratives, that I was going to somehow be not supportive of her and try to sabotage her and those kind of things. So I reached out to Cari we tell the funny story all the time about how we wound up being friends, and I won't belabor that point. And we wound up becoming pretty fast friends. And so as her friend, I, of course, got to be on the sideline to see some of the things that she went through. And Cari has talked about this publicly before, so I'm not saying anything that is out of school, as they say. I'm not talking out of school, not talking out of pocket, not talking about behind nobody's back, because Cari has talked about this experience herself on other platforms. And I believe on her own platform, she has done it as well. Cari had a very difficult time being a host on that show. Obviously, when you elevate in platform and you go to a place like ESPN, there's a lot that comes with that. Suddenly, you go from not being as known to being very well known. And as somebody who, used to be on that show, it's a very competitive type of show. An executive at ESPN used to joke with me all the time and say that First Take was the show of competitive talking. And it's true. It's like there's an aggressiveness to that show that is very different than maybe some of the other debate shows that you might see on TV. And Cari was having a hard time fitting in because of the dynamics on that show and working with very strong personalities, both on air and off air, and Stephen A. Smith and Skip Bayless. And there were so many days, I can tell you. And again, it's Cari's call what she wants to divulge to people about her time on that show. But Stephen A., I think at the very least, it is gross hyperbole to pretend as if during this time that you was just laying the cape down and Cari was able to walk over it. I'm not saying, look, I'm just saying this as somebody who was on the sideline and trying to be a supportive friend. In fact, one of the hallmark stories that Cari and I often tell about how our relationship got to be as tight as it was is because one day I had just moved into my apartment, or I hadn't been there I not just moved in, but I hadn't been there that long. I had an apartment in downtown Hartford because when Cari moved, I moved to Bristol, I think after Cari did. And so I was joining what was then called Numbers Never Lie, which, as many of you know, eventually became His and Hers and that kind of thing. And so I was going, I needed some things for my apartment. And so Cari was like, I'll pick you up. We'll go to, like Pottery Barn, one of those kind of places, Pier 1. I think it was Pier 1 Imports. We'll go to those places, get you some stuff so you can like finally furnish your place. I said, cool. Cari picked me up to go shopping. She had 2 styrofoam cups in the car. And she was like, I brought this for you. And I take a sip and it's a mimosa, right? And I was like, okay, now at this point, it's like 10 o'clock in the morning. And I'm really surprised. I was like, oh, we drinking? Like, what is going on here? Because this is very unusual. And I was like, what's going on? And her very next sentence to me was, oh, I'm quitting my job on Monday. She was talking about First Take. And I said, wait, what? And I was like, okay, what is going on this show? And so she started to reveal some things that were happening behind the scenes on the show, where she did not feel supported, where she felt very isolated. She felt like she didn't have a voice, and she was miserable, and she was going to quit. So again, it's up to Cari to tell specific experiences or whatever she wants to share about that. That is what she told me as a friend. And naturally, I was heartbroken because I want to see Cari do well. I want to see Cari succeed. I know that given her talent, that she can take this show that's already at a high level to even higher level. I know this. And so I listened. I did my best to not necessarily tell her what to do, but to tell her that she had what it took to make it work. And I'll say prior to that happening, there were things that I would see on air that I was bothered by. as someone who was a host of her own show at that point, and admittedly, yes, my relationship with Michael Smith was a lot different than hers with Skip and Stephen A. They didn't know each other. They didn't have the backstory of being friends. It was different. Mike and I were for real friends. And so our relationship on camera was light banter. Yeah, we would go at each other, but it was in a playful brother and sister type of way. And it was why a lot of people beloved the show. They didn't have that kind of relationship on First Take. Some of it was that, and Skip made it very known because he set the tone for the show, is that Skip had a mentality, if you ain't with us, you against us. And he looked at every show as competition. And not the kind of healthy competition that helps people get better or that encourages you to, like, oh, I see what they're doing on show X. We going to meet their level or exceed it. Not in that healthy kind of way that drives you, that's ambition, but in a way that's real unhealthy. That is how he saw other shows. That's the mentality that he gave off, and that permeated throughout the rest of the people on the show. And I would notice sometimes on air the way that they would talk to Cari, the way they would ignore her, dismiss her. And I thought it was just really unbecoming. And I said that to her, and I felt bad that I said that to her just because she's already trying to figure things out at ESPN. The last thing that she needs is somebody else coming in and saying, hey, I'm noticing that your two co-hosts be constantly disrespecting you on air. Just something that I noticed. Like, you already in the trenches. You don't need to hear from other voices about how things are going. And so I noticed those things. And when the domestic violence situation happened, getting back to that, which is what initially set Beadle off and made her not a fan of Stephen A for life. It made her a Stephen, if Stephen A got 10 haters, Michelle Beadle is one. If Stephen A got 2 haters, Michelle Beadle is one. If Stephen A has no haters, Michelle Beadle is dead. Like, it's that seems to be the energy that she gives off when it comes to Stephen A. Smith. And so when that happened, and I went to bat for Cari because I thought they put her in a bad position on the show as he's saying these comments, and there's already these tension between these 3 people. And I went to bat for Cari publicly. Skip Bayless stopped talking to me after that. He sent me a email. I don't know if I still have it. Maybe I do. Maybe I don't. He sent me an email, basically, frankly, sounding like a lot like how Stephen A sounded in his response to Cari, reminding me how much he had done for me, reminding me how I wouldn't be where I was if it wasn't for him. Feeling betrayed because I had the nerve to stick up for a woman that I felt y'all constantly disrespected on that show. And I have not spoken one word to Skip Bayless since. And this would have probably been, 2013, 2014. And I was like, oh, okay, it's like that. Well, I guess we weren't much of friends at all. But that's what I was telling you about, that mindset that Skip had. And it was very much, if you ain't for us, you against us. And so, Cari went through a lot on that show. And so when I'm assuming that some of her response to all of this, when she's like, the lack of support that I felt like I sometimes didn't receive, it's rooted in that. And perhaps that's a conversation that Cari and Stephen A need to have. Maybe it's a conversation they've already had. I don't know. That's grown folks' business. But I do know, as her friend, she did not feel supported. I know that 1,000%. I know it as well as I know my name. She didn't. And perhaps he felt like he was supporting her. I don't know. But however he felt like he was showing up for her, she didn't feel that. And that's her experience. Let's get to the rest of what he said.
Do I need to get bosses to confirm that I'm telling the truth? You know I can. When we see the diverse people that come on First Take, Black people, women, the list goes on and on. Who did that? That wasn't happening when Skip was there.
Let me stop you right there. I was on the show before you were there, Stephen A. So it was happening, and I wasn't the only one. It was me. It was Rob Parker. It was the Stews. A lot of Black voices. Shit, you want me to go back? It was Lomas Brown. It was Ray Buchanan. It was Sean King. Literally everybody debated, including you, because you were in the rotation of debaters. Everybody Skip Bayless debated for years was Black. Post Woody Page, just about everybody. Everybody was Black or everybody was a woman. You have continued that, obviously. And I do believe that you really have been very intentional about making sure women are on the show, about certain topics you have. So I'm not trying to not give you your credit, but come on, bro. We got to keep it 100 here. First Take having Black people on the show did not start with you. That started before you.
That was me. What are you talking about? When have I spoken against you? When have I thrown shade against you? When did that happen? That is a lie. Me, dogging Cari champion? When? And if I did it, why did you call me and root for me? What are you sick of? Or did you just want the attention? You see, we're going to have a deeper discussion right here and now because I'm sick of this. And I'm not going to be scared by women that I have loved on for many, many years as a colleague and as a contemporary and watching folks back. It doesn't mean everything that I'm going to do is going to please you. But y'all are talking without facts. We want to talk about, like Michelle Beadle talked about and other people talk. Ask John Skipper. Ask Connor Shell. Ask Norby Williamson. I'm usually not supposed to give out names, but what I'm saying to y'all is, whether it's Dave Roberts, it's a Burke Magnus, it's a Jimmy Pitaro, or anybody else, ask them my support. For numerous people that have walked through the walls of ESPN, including you and Jemele Hill. What are you talking about? I didn't want Jemele Hill to leave. I've been on the air religiously stating she's a miss for us. Highly intelligent, very accomplished, good peoples. What are you talking about?
Okay, so I heard that. And one, I appreciate Stephen A. Smith saying that. And, you know, I want people to be clear about something, or I want to be clear about something as it relates to this conversation. Stephen A. does not owe me anything. If he didn't think I should be back at ESPN, or if he didn't think that it was a miss for the network, it wouldn't bother me. I don't care, right? But I appreciate him saying that. Listen, when you're at a competitive place like ESPN, there are things that go on behind the scenes, and there are things that get whispered and things that get said that you just hear all the time. And, you know, what I would say about Stephen A's support of me is that I'm going to take him at his word. There have been certain moments I've wondered about whether during my time at ESPN, if he did support me, and I'm gonna keep those to myself. And I will, that's a discussion that I think that if there's anything that comes from this, that Stephen and I can have later on. But in a way, it's weird because it kind of doesn't matter. It's not like part of my life now, so I don't really care. But, you know, let's just say that I have heard contradictory information as far as that's concerned. And it wasn't about the Trump thing, if that's what, well, actually, there was something specific I heard about the Trump thing, but I'm gonna let that go. And actually, no, I'm just not gonna touch that one. I'm not gonna touch that one. Okay. But even prior to that, because at least the way I'd understood it is that there at least have been some discussion. I don't know if these were discussions that were led by Stephen A. about before Mike and I were promoted to the 6 o'clock Sports Center, that Stephen A. was somebody that they were considering for that role, which I did not know. And it was something that I wasn't told until after Mike and I had the 6 o'clock Sports Center. And you never want to think you don't want to have confirmation bias, is what I'm trying to say. It's like, you don't want to have confirmation bias and say like, yeah, even though I'd heard this, maybe this explains why. I don't want to be 2 + 2 = 4 in this thing, at all. But there were just some questions that I had in my mind once I was given that information. And, ESPN is a very competitive place. And I don't expect people to always play nice. And there were people, I'm not talking about Stephen A. in regard, but yeah, people I would have thought that I was cool with. But when you start sort of applying and going for the same things, you'll find out who's really your friend and who really isn't. It's what one would expect at a major network. It's just the environment. So let me address this right here. This Kevin Garrett. I do not know if Stephen A. said something bad about me, but I think he did. That's not what I'm saying. That's literally not what I'm saying at all. What I have to say on that issue, I will keep to myself. And that's for me and Stephen A. to discuss privately, is what I said. Okay? So make sure that you know that. So at any rate, and I want Stephen A. to understand something too, is like Cari wasn't lying. It's like, we do root for you, for sure. And Cari is a grown woman who's allowed her own thoughts and opinions. And my thoughts and opinions are that I'm happy you're in the position that you're in at ESPN. I'm really happy for it. And I think we're both on that accord, in the sense of that we know that it was extremely difficult for you, being a Black man, a non-professional athlete, to get to the place that you got to. That's something that is really remarkable. Your story, your rise, when I think about the history and the legacy of Black journalism, like, you're going to have one of the best stories that's ever been told, given what you have been able to accomplish in this profession, given what you have been able to do. I have defended you many, many times. Really, trust me. And so I have no dislike for you. I don't have any hate in my heart for you. I'm certainly not Michelle Beadle praying for your downfall. In fact, I'm praying for the opposite. I'm praying for your success. And so I think you may have been a little misguided into thinking that me or even Cari are sitting here rooting for you to fail. It is the complete opposite. We're not rooting for that at all. And so that's kind of where I stand on it. And I see some of these comments, the chat is going off. You guys never had a problem with Skip or Stephen A. while you were at ESPN. They've been that way. You actually don't know what we had a problem with. Because, listen, one of the things that was very clear when you are at ESPN, this is the network mentality, is like, they don't believe they didn't at the time. They didn't play that ESPN on ESPN crime. So there was no way, if we did have a problem with either one of us, there was no way we were ever publicly going to say that. All right? We weren't. And I think whatever problems that may arose, and Cari can speak to this more so than I can because she was on the show with both of them, is that whatever conflicts and things that they had on that show were handled on that show, or sometimes were not handled on that show. And that's just a part of the network television experience as well. But, at this point in my career and at this big old age is, yeah, there are things that I have a problem with, as Stephen A. says. They're his opinions, but I think he's used to that, and I think he's comfortable with that, and he ain't looking for me to solidify or validate anything that he says. And I am not looking for neither. But I will say, if he wants to have a deeper discussion, this should be a deeper discussion that does take place off air and not in front of everyone or whatever. And because I think there are just some areas that cannot be gone to publicly that are best said privately. What I will say is that I think, and I hope, that these criticisms of Stephen A. about how his energy is different, I think they should be, I hope that they are things that he takes to heart. Because, or at least a heart enough to evaluate how he says some of the things that he says. Is that, especially now that he is becoming more of a political voice at ESPN and elsewhere, and building his own, platform that he's been able to successfully build, is, people are going to ask questions when they see you talking about how you regret voting for Kamala Harris. And then everybody's wondering, like, well, the person in office is literally creating mayhem on a hourly basis. So it just feels like the criticisms can be very one-sided. And when they are directed at primarily Black people, other Black people such as myself and others are going to notice that. And, I have to wonder, honestly, if Cari had not said anything and pointing out the difference or the indifference you seem to have with Michelle Beadle, somebody who's always at your neck, as opposed to just plucking Jasmine Crockett out of the sky. I do wonder, if Cari hadn't said anything, I don't know that you would have ever responded to Beadle. And this is not to say that, like, you're on the hook for responding to everybody that has something about you. Because I've even said myself, if I spent all the time responding to the people who say things about me, I'd be on lives like this for hours at a time. So no, that's not necessarily what this is about. But I think, there have been some things you have said, and in the way and manner of which you have critiqued women in particular, that I have had an issue with. What also comes to mind is, the situation that you had with Monica McNutt. Monica, I've known Monica forever. She's somebody who is a great analyst, deeply admire her, very talented. And when you all got into that back and forth about the WNBA, and then you went on your show later, and again, it does strike me as very disappointing that you're sort of constantly throwing out this "I put you on" type of narrative, when it's, I'm not saying that Monica McNutt is not a reason, that you aren't a reason that Monica McNutt is not on First Take. But to be perfectly honest, sometimes that comes off as extremely patronizing and very paternalistic. And some of it could just be a difference in how people move. Like, there are favors and platforms and things that I've done for other people in this business, and I don't care how successful that they become. It's like, I'm not going to be reminding them of, like, remember when I did this for you? It's like, it seems very unsettling. So what I will say, about all of this, it has been very surprising to see it blow up the way that it did, and the manner in which it did. But maybe you and Cari never had that conversation about what her experiences were like on First Take. But I can just say that if you were of the mindset that you felt like you were really going to bat for her and really, helping her position, I don't know that came off that way. And certainly after she left First Take, she went to SportsCenter, and that was something that she orchestrated for herself, is being able to become a SportsCenter anchor. And this is why, how we all got here, it just kind of is what it is. But there is, at least for me, when I think about my time at ESPN, I think about mostly happy moments. I don't really think about some of the disappointments, every now and again, maybe, but like not really that often. And I have often credited First Take as a vehicle, because before it was, First Take, it was before First Take fully became a debate show. It was a morning show that morphed into a debate show. You mentioned Jamie Horowitz's name. Jamie Horowitz was, of course, the leader and organizer of First Take. And, I credit First Take often with being a show that really helped me to elevate and get my start. And I have credited Skip with this many, many, many times as being like, hey, that was like a real turning point for me in my career. But when I think about the totality of my career, there's a lot of decisions, a lot of good decisions that I had to make to get there. And I'm happy to give you the credit for the platform. Quite frankly, I didn't really do the show much after. I didn't really do First Take much after you became a permanent fixture, because it would have really been no need to. I did it some, but like not very often. But I will always consider First Take to be an important part of my journalistic story. But I tend to be of the mindset that what's understood need not be said. And I think you constantly kind of mentioning how you made people is a tale to me. But again, if anything to take away from this, I'm not saying that you were unsupportive of me. I mean, Stephen A., because to be honest, our orbits were not crossed that much. I don't really know that I was a thought process for you. I'm happy that, in the time since I've been gone, that you would say something like that. But in terms of, feeling like I should still be at the network. But I do think that there's probably some more conversations you might need to have, because I think you'd be surprised what you learned. So I see a lot of you have a lot to say about everything I just said. And I know to some degree I was maybe all over the place. This is funny to me. On another note, you sat one row in front of me at the Jeezy show in Vegas. Wasn't that show amazing? Show was absolutely amazing. I had never seen Jeezy live. This is in Las Vegas, Halloween weekend. It was an incredible performance by him. Jeezy deserves all the things. I damn near lost my voice at that concert, but yes, it was dope. And you should have said hi if I was sitting right in front of you. So I'm going to address some of your comments here, because I know a lot of you have a lot of questions. So, okay, here, I'm late to all of this, but to be fair, Cari is wrong for saying Sass didn't come for Beadle. From what I just saw of this clip, he went in. Yeah, he went in after Cari said, why didn't you go in? Why didn't you keep that same energy? Just so you understand. Cari responded to the fact that Beadle said what she said, and Stephen A. didn't have anything to say until he did have something to say, which is after Cari said something, hence why he was addressing both of them. So let's just be clear about that. Yeah, all right, here you go. Did he go after you and Cari as she said? Well, Tyrone, I just spent a long time discussing that. And as I alluded to, I mean, some of it, I just think it's just best in-house. That's just me. And that's just how I choose to deal with it. And I'm gonna just leave it at that. You still didn't say what, because it ain't my business. Let Cari handle that. I told you what I know based off as her friend, how she needed a lot of support during her time on First Take. That's what I said. So yes, you are correct. In-house does mean no. But listen, Jemele trying to filibuster us to death, but versus saying Stephen A. actually said anything false. So I'm sorry I can't give y'all all the tea that y'all necessarily want. I mean, some of it too is also, I'm trying to be respectful of the fact that I didn't bring this to light necessarily. Cari did. And I think Cari deserves to tell her own story. I know that she will be addressing this further on her own. And so, yeah, I'm gonna let her address it. Whatever it is she felt like was said. Did Sass ever help or support you at ESPN? Kind of, sort of. I mean, that's and I'm not saying that as a disrespect to Stephen A. Smith, but you have to understand that our paths were not crossing at all. And that, like, when I got to the network, Stephen A. was not at ESPN. He had been let go or left. However, their contract wasn't agreed to. So I started doing First Take, which was then Cold Pizza, maybe 3 or 4 months after I got to ESPN. And Stephen A. was not part of that at all until maybe like a couple years later, when Skip advocated for him to be used as a contributor to the show, were a lot of us who were contributors during that time. Because after Woody Page and Skip broke up as a duo, Skip had a rotating list of debaters. So I would do First Take maybe 1 week or 2 weeks a month, as one of the rotating debaters on the show. And so it was different. And so as I started to kind of make my way is when they kind of decided that they wanted a permanent opposite to Skip. And then they brought Stephen A. in as the person that they chose to be the regular co-host of First Take, with Skip. And I went on to do sideline reporting. Then I joined Numbers Never Lie. So it's like, unless there's something I don't know, as far as I know, Stephen A. had nothing to do with me getting Numbers Never Lie. He had nothing to do with me getting His and Hers or that becoming a show. He had nothing to do with us getting promoted to the 6 o'clock Sports Center. In fact, as I mentioned to you all earlier on this live, at least what was told to me after was that Stephen A. wanted that same time slot and to be host of the 6 o'clock Sports Center, which I did not know. And so, then when all the Trump stuff happened, I never talked to Stephen A. So personally, as far as I know, no, he didn't. I mean, that doesn't mean, and first of all, again, let me be clear. I'm not saying that was his job to do anyway, right? So whether he did or didn't, to me, is irrelevant, because that wasn't really Stephen A.'s responsibility once I was there. And so, no, I didn't, any of those things that he said about like how he said it was a miss, that obviously happened after I was gone. So no, it didn't really, that part of the support didn't register. Now, were Stephen and I cordial, cool? Yes, we were. In fact, when Mike and I had the podcast, we even had Stephen A. on as a guest, and he told the incredible story of his life and his journey and everything. No, I'm sure he may have had positive words to say about me. So from a support from that standpoint, that's certainly possible. But there was never a situation that I'm aware of while I was at ESPN where they needed Stephen A. directly advocating for me in order for me to get something at ESPN, because we just were not in each other's line of fire that way. So yeah, to answer that question. It's an interesting one. Bring John Skipper on the show and let him talk. I know Skipper. I know Skipper quite well. We haven't talked in a few months, though. Skipper's doing great. Listen, if Stephen A. had some conversations with Skipper that I'm not privy to, because realize, too, when I left ESPN, John Skipper was no longer the president of ESPN. Jimmy Pitaro was. And so, no, I'm unaware of this. And so, I mean, that's the best answer I can give you. All right, here's another one. Why did he say she tried to come back and he set up a meeting? I don't know anything about that. That is something Cari has to deny, confirm, whatever. I have no clue. I will say I hadn't heard that, but doesn't mean it didn't happen. So I'm not calling anybody a liar. I just don't know. So yeah. Anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and wrap this up. I just wanted to address a few of you guys' comments, but you know, I think you guys know where I stand on everything. I try to be as transparent as possible about it, but as for, you know, my part and my role in all this, that was pretty much what I was trying to kind of explain. It's like, as when, you know, Cari's my friend, that's my homie. I support her unconditionally and always. And I know what she went through on First Take. And the experience that Stephen A. described was not the experience that, as her friend, that I was let in on. That was not the experience that she shared with me. And to be honest, if you all just, sometimes I hesitate to say do your own research, but you can literally YouTube Cari talking about her experience on First Take, and she's talking about some of the same things that I shared, where she says that she had a hellish time on that show. She grew a lot. She learned a lot. Obviously, her platform rose, but there was a lot happening behind the scenes. And that's the experience she was speaking to when she talked about feeling unsupported. My experience in terms of Stephen A.'s support, what he disclosed about what he said after I was gone from the network, was something I didn't know. And again, I appreciate, while I was there, Stephen A. and I, our careers are not intertwined as such, and certainly weren't to the point where he could advocate for me to get something, because that wasn't really how our careers were going or set up. That wasn't kind of where we were. So, and I'm not saying that like he didn't have nice words to say about me while he was at ESPN. That's not what I'm saying. But, you know, the put you on thing I find to be curious. Anywho, thank you guys for joining me. I appreciate it. Another episode here of SPOLITICS Live. You know, as always, if you want to, make sure that you subscribe to my YouTube channel here. Check out SPOLITICS, the podcast, which is available on iHeart. But, you know, before you leave, make sure you hit subscribe, like, do all the things. I generally come by here once or twice a week to try to share my thoughts and opinions on things that are happening. And I appreciate you all being patient. I know everybody is not going to agree with everything that I said, or in the manner in which I said it, or how I chose to break it down for myself. But just know that it always comes from the heart, and it always comes from a position of truth. So I'll see y'all later. And thanks for joining me on SPOLITICS Live.